welcome to the CU Try Show. And I have, my name is Karen Sims, and I'm with the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative. And I am super happy to have and announce one of the really exciting initiatives, a training initiative in Champaign County. We were trained in the spring, and we're going to tell you all about it, called a Trauma-Informed Policing Initiative. And I have great guests with me who are a small snapshot of the overall project, who can tell you about it, and we welcome questions. So without further ado, can we start off with introductions? And I don't care what order we go. Can you introduce yourselves? Oh, we don't have formal titles, so please introduce yourselves. I'm looking at your names, but you didn't put your titles, so.
Okay, I'll start.
Okay.
I am Assistant Chief Barb Robbins with the University of Illinois Police Department. And I've been teaching on this topic for probably about 15 years.
Yeah.
And because I work on a college campus, there's a lot of focus on crimes against folks and then the first responders who have to deal with it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I'll go next.
Okay.
I'm Sam, the College Relations Officer at Parkland College. I've been in law enforcement, since 2005. And this particular initiative is very important to me. We are all affected by trauma, but I feel like I've lived so much of it through, from childhood to even now. And really learning how to navigate that has helped me better police, to serve community and really understand that component of empathy and understanding that trauma is not just, a closed event where we're continually healing. And if we can get everybody on board in the criminal justice system to understand, how we interact with people and understanding people's past and how that trauma continues to affect them even currently, even if it's something that's happened long ago, we do such a better job in terms of how to serve them overall instead of just looking at one component or trying to, solve a call for service in those few minutes and hope that we don't have to come back to that house. It's broader and really trying to offer help. So yeah, I'm excited about this initiative. We've got a great group of people working on it. So Lamont?
Yeah.
There's no way to follow any of this. Let me just go. Oh no, good afternoon to you, Barb, Sam, and you, Karen. To those who may be watching or watch later. My name is Lamont Peppers. I am the Community Engagement Coordinator for the City of Urbana and participated in the SAMHSA Trauma-Informed Policing Training with Karen and Sam and several other of our community members as well. So good afternoon.
Good afternoon. And I am so welcome to have you here. And what we said was we're a snapshot of a whole group. So we have representation from each of the law enforcement departments in Champaign County, so including Rantoul and the sheriff's office and community representatives. We were a mixed bag, right? So we were half community, half law enforcement, because we wanted to model the values in which we speak, right? So it was a pretty exciting training experience to journey with you virtually. We were one of the largest contingencies, right? So there were like 20 of us going through training. So we've hinted at what the training is. Who can speak to it? Talk to me about what you think it is. Sam, you said a lot about trauma, but maybe share some more about what is this training thing? Because we kind of got a question. And so I think that maybe your comment might answer one of the questions that we got already in advance.
Turn my mic back on here. So the nice part about this training is that we take a look at what trauma is, right? And every single person has experienced it. So some examples of that would be natural disasters, people, the Katrina floods, and we look at what we're in right now, the pandemic. Different things, whether it's sexual abuse, physical abuse, observing, parents going through alcoholic abuse. I mean, there's so many different ways that trauma affects us. So it kind of breaks it down to define what trauma is and the effects of it, even going over how violence can be cyclical. So you might have somebody who is sexually abused as a child, and then growing up and the types of relationships that they have, how they try to transition that control. And maybe that's why, they look for certain types of partners. So all of it, it's a broad spectrum, but when we look at how everybody is affected by trauma, we realize it's not just, a lower class thing, a middle class thing, or, people who are white collar professionals are dealing with trauma. So, we don't have a one size fits all approach to this. And anybody that's in the criminal justice system can play a part of this in terms of how we're helping each other to heal. So I just want to go back when we talked about our group, our cohort of people. If we could just list everybody so they understand how great our collaboration is.
Absolutely.
I mean, so we've got the city of Champaign, the city of Urbana, people from Unit 4, the school districts, right? Rosecrans. Feel free to pop in here. So McHenry County,
We've got the
Champaign County Sheriff's
NAACP,
Office,
the
police training-
NAACP, the Ministerial Alliance.
Mhm. We've got pastors that are with us, social workers, professors from U of I, a counselor here, Donna Tanner Harrell from Parkland College. So, I mean, everybody has come to join together in this effort. And that's why, when we did the training, even though it was on Zoom, we were all so hyped about it. We were like, look at this group, and think about the things that we're going to be able to do. So we had passion in it as a group and getting trained, and we know how effective this is going to be. And so Karen, because this is like evidence-based, I mean, that speaks to another group that wants to know, well, how effective is this training going to be? Well, what is it based on? Because everybody's like, oh, our training is great. Like ours really is going to be effective. So I'm excited to get it up and rolling. And the fact that we're offering it for free is amazing. So somebody's gonna have to cut me off because
No, Sam, you were like doing the pitch. So but feel free to chime in because this is a dialogue. So this is wonderful. Yeah. So share more about the training and like why you were interested in it.
Come on, Lamont.
I think the big thing for me is that there's an important learning curve that happened in the training that needs to take place, not just in criminal justice, but in a lot of our professional settings, in our school districts, I think oftentimes in our daily interactions. And that's when it talked about when your trauma shows up while trying to respond to trauma. And I think learning that acute awareness of when one's self has been triggered by someone else's outward behavior or outward responses, I think that's very important. I think in our group, we talked a lot. I mean, what I loved about the training is the training was what it was. It took us through step by step. It gave us succinct information and steps to follow as far as from the trauma recognition to the interaction, to the de-escalation, to the reentry. It just really kind of gave us steps to follow. But I like that it created space for us to learn more about our own traumas. What happens when I go to interact with Karen, maybe even to help or to de-escalate her, but then something triggers within me. And so I think that I like the fact that it kind of stripped away the notion of having to know it all. You did not have to be a counselor or a psychologist or a social worker to get this training and leave it prepared to share the information. So I think the universal approach was nice. And I also like the way it did not shy away from the timbre of the nation and much that's happening around racial unrest right now and social class unrest. I appreciated that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, just to follow up on that, and we want to just look at our own community and what's going on in our own community today with the violence. There's a lot of people that are being touched by this within our communities. And I think that people don't really understand what trauma is and how it can affect you, and that it's long lasting. So, you know, not even for the first responders and the ambulance people and the people at the hospitals and the people at the funeral homes and the family members, for us to be able to get out there in the community and do this training at no cost to different groups, it is also going to open up the eyes of other people, because I don't know that people really understand sometimes what the effect of trauma does with them. And with all the current violence going on in our community, that's a lot of trigger points for folks that are feeling sad and depressed and scared and fearful for what's going on in our community. And so by, you know, bringing in our group so that we can have the dialogue, talk about it, understand trauma, how it affects you as an individual and affects the people around you, is going to be very beneficial to anybody who brings us in to do this training. It's not just law enforcement or first responders. It is our entire community that is dealing with different aspects of trauma.
Yeah, so I'm going to just take 1 second to make sure everybody's clear, and we're going to make sure that you have information. So we are announcing a free training that is available to your organizations, your community groups. We want you to invite us in, and it will be co-facilitated, right, by both law enforcement and a community partner. We promise you're always going to get both in, because we want to model the fact that we can work collaboratively. That's one of our hopes for this effort is that we are a part of the healing process, right? By even demonstrating, because we want to increase our awareness of trauma and increase your awareness of trauma so that we can be better equipped to treat each other better and to be more helpful. And we see this as foundational. So I know we had a question around how does this fit with like the Ubuntu police initiative? And I would say, like, we are hoping, regardless of where you are, if you're an activist, an educator, a law enforcement person, if you're in child welfare, right, regardless of where you are, we believe as a foundation that having an understanding of trauma is the first step in the conversation, right? So you can build upon it around however you implement it, but this is about us getting a shared understanding of what it means, how we can be wounded, and what it means to be healing. And I know sometimes the word trauma informed gets thrown away and people think it's like reductionist or it's like something else. But I really feel like, and I want you all to chime in, like, this is not just about like how to label people or how to be limiting. It's helping us be more compassionate with each other. Yeah, go,
So,
please.
an easy way to sum up trauma-informed responses is just the difference in question. So a lot of times I do this with my own kids. So I have a 5-year-old son, and sometimes he'll do something like he has a lot of poop adventures, right? And I'll find random, and one of my responses is just like, son, what is wrong with you? You know, but instead of going to people when we respond is like, what's wrong with you? It's what happened to you that is causing you to act like this. Now, I can't understand the mind of my 5-year-old. I had to Google and understand that, you know, that kids go through a phase where they want to inspect their fecal matter and stuff. But in terms of events that happen, it literally is what we should be doing instead of, you know, asking what's wrong with you. It's what happened to you, you know, to figure out how did we get to where we are today. And when we think of people's rich histories and how profound they are, you know, it's not just one singular event that somebody has experienced. It could be, but to take that juvenile that we're interacting with or that domestic situation we're responding to figure out what else has this partner been going through before we got here, not just 3 hours before this, but the week before, the months before this. What was this relationship like, you know, before they got married? Or what type of things are they struggling with? And it's just understanding, just to open that lens to figure out that we're dealing with layers, and then for us to be more empathetic in our response to that, and then figuring out, okay, knowing that, how do I not re-traumatize this person? I have to be mindful of, things that I don't want to say. I mean, has the person been arrested before? Have the children who are on scene seen a parent, dragged away in cuffs before? That might change my approach, just to say, you know what, let's finish having this conversation. Let the kids go inside and watch something, and I'll finish talking to you on the porch. Just there's lots of things that we could do, and it doesn't take that much longer just to have that thought process change for us to acknowledge it. Okay, let me figure out how this person got here, and I'm gonna just approach it differently. So.
Yeah. It's like we're going in order, but I was like, Barbara, I see your mic's off, so.
Go right ahead, Barbara.
Well, I was just going to say, Karen, maybe you could talk just a little bit about how to sign up for our class.
Oh, yeah. So there is so on the, after, like for you, a couple different ways. And thank you for saying that. One, I want to remind you, I don't think we said this, that this is done in partnership with the Police Training Institute, and TRI is just handling the sign up and link. So we actually have a link that you can get that'll be on the broadcast, but you can email the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative a short time, but we have a link that we can send out that helps you register your organization on your own. We have an Eventbrite that you can go to also register. And so we can sort of work with you around that. So on the broadcast, so in the short run, you can email traumaresiliency.inc@gmail.com. You can do that, nice and simple. You can also call us at 217-931-9971, and we will then send you a registration link so that you can sign up your organization. But that we have flyers that we can send out, and we'll be sending out. And then after on this broadcast, we'll also put the contact information at the end of this broadcast so that people who want to sign up can find it. Thank you. But I would be remiss if I did not say that part of the reason why we were able to do this in partnership was that Michael from the Police Training Institute took leadership about making sure this effort could happen. And so we want to be ensured that not only are we wanting to get this information out into the community, but law enforcement also will be, taking educated about this, because I feel like that's the second thing. And Lamont, I don't want to interrupt you, but I do think that if I'm in the community and thinking about community needs, one of the things that we should probably talk about is, hey, there's been some conflict between, or perceived conflict, real or perceived, between the community and law enforcement. So how could something like this help with that? Like, what do you think this could do? Because, right, we'd be remiss if we didn't actually elevate its practical, not only the personal, but the community impact. And I don't want to put you on the spot, Lamont, but you might have wanted to say something else, but you might be the first as the community. I
don't mind. There were a couple of things that were touched on that I found were important and interesting, but from a community side, and I don't begin to try to speak for the entire community, let me say that. I don't begin to try to speak for the Black community, let me say that. I'm not even trying to speak from the Black male community. But as someone who has observed community, someone who has observed policing, someone who has engaged in the Champaign-Urbana community for over 40 years, someone who has had both positive and negative interactions with police enforcement, I think, and I hope, let me say that, it's my hope that what this training does is that it begins to open up levels of transparency so that police officers begin to talk about mistakes that they're making on the regular, and then to create room to change. It may not be fair, but I think it is, I think that it's a statement to be made that it's okay that we hold our officers of the law to a higher standard than the regular citizen. And I think that's about policing, protecting, all those things. In saying that, I think that we also should hold them to a higher standard of interaction. And my hope is that this trauma response training will give them tools so that when they arrive upon the scene, the empathy that Sam touched on and the not what are you doing, but what happened to you is more than a phrase, but it is an interactive mindset that I begin to encounter and treat people with an empathetic wonderment of, okay, how did they get here? How can I help or serve? And I think that sometimes, and don't get me wrong, there are scenarios, if you get somewhere and fists are flying and, sticks are waving or bullets are whizzing through the air, that's not the time for us to sit down and have a 5-point discussion. I understand that from a policing standpoint, there are certain things then that have to happen in the now. But I also think that there are interactions where it's okay for our police officers to extend points of conversation. Oftentimes when people are encountered by police, it's like, why are you stopping me? I think that our police officers need training to be like, what's it going to cost me to take 2 minutes, 120 seconds to explain to this person why I stopped them, to give them some information as we go through whatever has to happen in the interaction. And I can tell you from a personal experience that when an officer has taken time to explain to me why I'm being stopped or why I'm being detained or why I'm being interrupted for conversation, it helped the timbre, the mood, the exchange of information. It just helped. And times when I asked why you're stopping me and they refused to explain it, it really narrowed the scope of our ability to exchange information fairly. And so one of the things in few talks that I've had, citizens want to feel like whether I'm in the right or the wrong, that I'm treated humanely. Even if I have to be detained, even if I have to be arrested, even if I have to be transported, that there's still a way to do that gives them information and certainly allows them to feel the humanistic side of that law enforcement interaction. And I got a lot of that from this training. I feel that this training from a community standpoint, as well as a police officer standpoint, created so many tools and so many pockets for that to happen. So I'm hoping that our community sees and feels that improvement.
I have one little thing, and I don't want to interrupt law enforcement, but the other thing that I hope, and I'm going to tie it back to something you said in the beginning, Lamond, is, and this is not me being an apologist, so I want to say, because I feel like I'm going to lose cool points or like advocacy points, but I think sometimes we miss the woundedness of our officers, nor have we made space for that, right? Like, so once you know how stressed brains are, like if I'm an officer and I know like when I have like been responded and I'm rushing and I'm blah, 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 like, and I know that about myself and I come in and I'm slightly dysregulated, I'm not likely, right? Like I'm more likely to sort of be more abrupt or be more short or be more responsive, right? Like, so my brain, right? Like once you know about yourself, this is what I've learned about my own trauma journey is when I know about what triggers me, when I get permission to do my own self-care and wellness, I am better regulated. And I hope that this also helps law enforcement be equipped to show up to have those conversations. Because I believe, right, most people go into law enforcement with really well-intended training, right? Like they want to help and heal, but because of the demands of the work and also some social norms that say it is not good to take care of yourself or slow down or, right, to be hypervigilant, right? Like if I'm watching videos and listening about crime over and over again, and I really don't have relationships with people, I come in more keyed up. And so if you know that about yourself, then you can respond differently. So again, I'm not making excuses. I am saying that I think sometimes when you get more tools in your toolbox, you can be more fortified for the journey. So that is part of my wish.
So, yes, thank you. Sometimes there's an agenda out there, right? So things start off being well-intentioned, and then this other entity will latch on, and it's used to push a certain agenda. And what I really liked about this training is that we're looking at all sides of it. So not just the criminal justice system and its responders, but like that vicarious trauma, it affects you as an officer, but also as a citizen, right? So when we're looking at the news, which they love to just put the negative out there, right? This is what is in people's minds. So even as officers, whether it was our training videos in the academy, or the news that we just saw, or what is it, World Star, these outlandish videos, and then we respond to these calls. Well, we have to remove ourselves, because every situation is different. What I loved about the training is, and you guys probably remember when we had like those whiteboard moments where we could, talk about things. It was like, oh, let's put this on the list, this on the list. And we specifically said, like, are we going to talk about race? Are we going to talk about the racial issues with policing? And this is just a personal thing that I have been making it a point to like study, but it's hard for me when I hear the anti-police rhetoric that's out there a lot, because I want to be supported and I know that I have good intentions, but at the same time I have to be mindful of where that's coming from. So that may not be directed personally at me, but my badge represents something to the communities that the profession has hurt. So I have to be mature enough to say, okay, I have to understand the history of policing, what officers used to be hired to do, and be open to that and not get offended, and to understand even the ties to slavery, right? But just to say, I acknowledge that and I get it. And I'm trying to understand the effects of that too, and yes, certainly I don't want to be judged just for that. I'm human behind this badge, but likewise, I have to do that with the community. I can't go to, I'm rolling up to the North End now, and then all of a sudden I have this mentality about everybody that lives there. We can't do that. Right. So it was really nice in the training. We were able to just have real conversations. And when we do this training for other people, I want people to feel comfortable enough to know that it's a safe space for us to engage each other and have those healthy discussions to figure out, like, let's figure out a way that we can do this. How can our responses be helpful instead of hurtful? Because we don't want to continue that cycle. So.
Yeah. All right. I wasn't sure, Barbara. I saw you moving. So I wasn't sure if you wanted to chime in or say anything. You're like, no, I'm good. All right. So I'm going to move on to the next question, but can I ask a question more directly? Because I know, Deputy Chief Robbins, you've been doing this work for 15 years. Why do you think it is important for, so you said it has also been a part of the work that you have sort of done in your training, which was so super impressive. Why do you think this is important beyond maybe what we've already shared?
Well, I mean, in some of the training, we do talk about trauma, and one of our slides in the training talk about kind of mental health issues that we're dealing with too. So I, like many others, I grew up in this community and I live in this community. So I'm very aware of everything that's been going on in our community and the lack of resources. And for people to sit down and have these conversations, which I find to be very important. When we just talk about the mental health aspects, some of the stats are 70% of women and 25% of men were sexually abused or raped before the age of 20. 47% of women, 27% of men, parents hit or threw things at one another. 61% of women, 68% of men, parents beat or hit them with a belt, whip, or strap. So we talk about the different types of the community we live in, and we don't know what goes on in people's homes. My passion has always been that you've got to be able to put yourself out there and train. And I love this program because I finally get to train with people from the community, people from other coalitions, people from mental health, people from cultural competency, There's so many other people. It's not about me as law enforcement. This is my job. This is my career, but it's also my passion to get out in the community and give them the tools they need to help themselves, to help their kids, to help their family recognize what's going on within the family or the community in general, so that we can provide resources.
Yeah.
And we have all the people on this team that we have put together out of the 20 of us. We got everything we need. We got all the people we need to get people to the right avenues to get the help that they need. And so that's always been my passion, you know, being in this job, is doing training on sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, things that are going on in our community, educate people, you know, like, you can't do this, or if this happens to you, you need to get help. You can't not get help after you have experienced trauma, because you can't help yourself. You need outside people who are not connected with this. And so that's really always been my goal.
Yeah.
Is, you know, God gifted me, and my job is to spread the word and get people help and the resources. And I try to surround my people like this group so that I can get the resources. I know I can pick up the phone and call Karen. I know I can pick up and call Mr. Peppers, or I could call Sam at Parkland. I got people. And that's really what this training is all about. It's in having good discussions and being, like Sam said, in a safe place with folks. I don't have all the answers for the police world, but that's not my main role here. My main role is, I see something, let me give that person resources.
Love it.
So
I'm inspired. Anybody else have a thought? Okay, so I'll keep plugging away with the conversation. I don't want to interrupt the flow. So I can't tell. So Lamont, I see your mouth like tentatively, like, I don't know, right? Like, do you see Lamont like wants to say something? I'm like, just go ahead and say it, right?
I don't know what's that, but I think I want to try to make sure that I keep the paradigm shift as even as possible and choose my words carefully, in that a lot of the commentary and stuff that I'm hearing, sharing, seems to be coming from police at the community. And I'd really like to switch that around and say, really, I think really a lot of this needs to come more towards the police for the community. Because in this specific community and in communities in our surrounding state and country, we have police officers who are trained and are good at their job and are carrying traumas that show up and negatively impact their interactions with people, and specifically people of color. And so until we begin to name that, until we begin to talk about the fact that the honest truth is that when police officers go to Lincolnshire, it's a different level of stress than when they go to the north side of Champaign, the east side of Urbana. And until we are willing to talk about why is that, until we are willing to unpack the trauma, and Sam hinted on, you know, she said, you know, the news always talks about the negative, World Star, and these types of things. But see, it's the same way for citizens. And these same news venues, these same social medias are depicting images that are perceived as negative within the Black community. And then that heightens negative responses from officers that we need. And one of the things that I think is lost on, when I was growing up, police officers were called officers of the peace. Peace. And so my concern is that as we move forward in times where we already know that tensions are high, stressors are high, we got to be mindful of the fact that those doing the job, your stressors are high, your tensions are high. And I believe that this training allows for our police officers to unpack and resort some of these inner stressors and traumas. It allows them to unpack some historical things without fear of losing their job, without fear of being punished, so that when they interact with our community, it's not such a negative impact. And until we begin to empower our citizens to understand that our police are here to work and serve for us as opposed to snatch up and catch up us, the best of trainings, I think, falls by the wayside. So with this trauma-informed policing training, even though it will or could or should or might be done dual training, I think that it is best that we first begin to unpack this within our policing agencies. We need our officers to get this training so they can practice it. I have never, ever in life been to a single training where I had a down pat after one time. My first professional encounter with Ms. Sims was in 2018 at Urbana High School, and I've been working on my trauma-informed responses ever since. And even before, because I worked in mental health, I've been in mental health now over, if I did the math, I'm sure it's over 20 years, but because diagnoses and because things are ever changing, I have to be willing to be open to ever changing responses. That's part of my hope, that just as good as someone is sharp with the gun, just as good as someone is sharp with the observative eye to see trouble, that they're also as sharp to see moments where empathy can come in, where humanism can come in. I don't think the badge divorces you from being a human person. That's all I'm saying. And we're all flawed. Me first. Let me say that. Me first. I'm so flawed. Whee! But I just think, to be able to say I'm flawed and not worry about retaliation, not worried about what does this do at my job. I think that this training does a great job of taking some stigma out of policing so that officers have an opportunity to learn about their traumas, how to resort, unpack, and better act with our community.
Well, I feel like I am the Pollyanna-ish of the group, so I'm going to apologize again. So I will say that I love for me, that is why I wanted us to have this training. So when I saw the announcement, I really when Lynn Canfield sent the announcement over and shared it and asked who would be interested. I reached out to Michael and I was like, we need this, because I saw it as a chance to do a twofold approach, right? It provides, and so I want law enforcement to chime in. It provides an opportunity to make sure that there might be a universal understanding. And the fact that we have representatives from every police department and the sheriff, right? We actually have the sheriff and we have, right, every police department. I don't know how that happens, right? Where we have full representation. As a matter of fact, SAMHSA said that we had actually the strongest application of all the people who applied, because we just had such great law enforcement representation. So if you think about so it allows, right, for people to not only go through training, but then have people who are right there in their departments, reinforce the skills, coach and mentor, provide some support, know that they have allies, that they can talk about it, having Michael and having, Deputy Chief Robbins, right? All of those things will allow for that, while also giving a resource and tool to the community. And I also think, because I really, and again, this is Karen, apologist, I really believe in community relations, community policing as the inherent model. And what I know is when I don't have relationships, when it's us and them, when I don't, when you are all strangers and we try to come together and build a relationship really quickly in a crisis, that never works. And so I know when every single law enforcement officer who agreed to participate in the training, they were like, we want people to know us. We want to change the policing model. And I believe, right, your department, right, Chief Seraph, right, I can't think of a single leader who's local in our law enforcement who hasn't demonstrated, at least explicit, verbally, their commitment to sort of reimagining policing so that it's more community centered. And that will, and I know that there's always some pushback, right? It's not like airy-fairy kumbaya, right? But there is a chance really at this moment to transform what the departments look and feel like. Am I right? I feel like you guys want to foster a different culture. So that's me being Karen, apologist. So I'm telling you what the hope and wish is, and we will get a chance to evaluate it, because SAMHSA didn't put in evaluation metrics. And so we want to be able to measure this over time. So I'm going to stop talking.
Now, Karen, we do want to change that culture. You know, there's deficiencies within the profession and our subculture that we have to work on. And those changes, you know, as with everything, they don't happen overnight. And doing that in-house while still serving the community. I mean, it's just an ongoing process. We don't want to, you know, just solely focus on one and then abandon another. So yes, Lamont, you're right. We do need to start at home with our departments, do this training here with us, and continue to offer it, you know, to any organization. So whether it's a church organization or the HR department here at Parkland, you know, or going to smaller police departments where they didn't have access to it, you know, but just to say, hey, we know that it works and we're here to help get your officers trained. We talked about doing that and making it a requirement with some of the curriculum through the Police Training Institute. So all of these ideas are out there, and we know where the work needs to be done, and we're starting it now with this initiative. So I'm super excited. Glad you guys put in the work to get our grant approved. I mean, I was super hyped when, you know, McHenry County and Champaign County got to do this joint effort together. But now we get to start serving. And yeah, what an awesome collaboration that we have across, you know, within Champaign County to be with you guys. So Karen, is there a way, I know we listed all the ways, but is there going to be something in chat or something that's printed where people can go to these links or
So
find
when
out
they
how to
go to
apply?
Facebook, when they go to the Facebook, there's gonna be links.
Okay.
When the show broadcasts, there'll be like, so you'll know when the show is aired. We'll put like a closing slide for when it's broadcasted for more information, and people can again always find us. You know, you've hinted at something. So Sam Officer Penland was a part of a working group that James Fielder chaired, who's over with the Ministerial Alliance, and they have this huge, like, amazing plan that we are working on making real, where, you know, there eventually might be like a website where you can ask questions, but also find resources, because we really want to create as many spaces and places where the values that Lamont talked about, the values that all of the officers have talked about are modeled, and that is helpful and useful and collaborative. So we see this as the start of a long-term commitment, right? And not just sort of a, you know, drive-by event, because I love your plan. So, you know, every day I think at least a couple times a week, I peek at it and say, okay, how do we do this? And who can we use? We've reached out to WeCU, some of the students, to see if they can take on parts of the project. We believe in this work and feel like in this moment it is super important, as, you know, many of us are stressed. And I feel like I'm going to say one last thing and then I'm not, then I really promise. So I've been really committed to like looking at collective trauma over this past year. And one of the things that people who do the work say, when we go us and them, and, you know, all of that creates more collective trauma. And the way that you heal is that where you look at where you've been doing othering, you try to reclaim it, right? Because as long as there's light and dark and good and bad, we will always be fragmented. And in this moment, right, where we are so fragmented, we've got to try to figure out where in the Venn diagram, you know, we can find community, and that we work together to rebuild and repair that. And it only happens in relationship, because if we stay disconnected in this, right, like the pain just keeps growing. So that's my plug for why I think this is super. So I, you know, clearly I've gone way down the rabbit hole of being committed to this work. So I have a couple more questions, because I don't want to like, you know, lose that. So I'm looking at so if you were thinking about, so we talked about the various audiences this training could be used for, and Lamont talked about, hey, make sure we think about it happening for law enforcement. And Barbara, you talked about that it could be used for community groups. Anybody else that you think would benefit from the training, that if you wanted to sort of say, see yourself, who else do you think should be participating? or might find this of use to them?
I think in our school districts,
Ooh,
I think that one of the things we talked about in my breakout group was how we take this program to the schools to give teachers a refresher set of tools on dealing with the trauma that enters their classroom. When you house young people for, only 7 or 8 hours a day, and that leaves another, 16 to 17 hours of impact that we know very little about. So how do we go in there and help our teachers identify their traumas and begin to kind of unpack that? Because teaching, support staff, all the different intricate pieces that happen within our school buildings to provide services all the way down, and I don't mean down from a pecking order standpoint, just along the list, from our administrators, our teachers, our support staff, our custodians, our lunch workers, the social workers, the counselors, the one-to-one aides. How do we just get down that line and just give them different sets of tools to unpack so that their response to a child or student's trauma does not re-trigger, make worse, heighten. The one thing that I liked about the training is we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to go in there and pick out and recreate a chapter. The information is really crosses over nicely. And so as a trainer to say, hey, present what's in front of you, but prepare for the questions that can come at you. That's what I appreciate. When we do this, if you and I do it, Karen, and we go through chapters 1 through 6, we're going to give the exact same information as if Sam and Barb do it. The information stays the same. And I think that level of consistency is what I really appreciated about this, because I've been in lots of different trainings, from trauma-informed responses to, culturally responsive teaching or culturally responsive. How do we do? And oftentimes the information is different. So then I leave with all this different information in my mind. And then when something happens, I'm trying to figure out, okay, which one do I use? This here is a set of information that has the same set of steps that, that we can all embark on in the same fashion. So I think the schools are a great place to start.
okay.
Or at least work. I don't know about start, but work. I think it's a great place to give the information.
Love it. Any other thoughts?
I was just going to say, definitely for our educators, so that's a good one. But also maybe our workforce development staff, right? So we're taking, whether it's at the re-entry level or at the unemployment office, we're having people come in and starting there. I mean, and like I said, everybody has had different levels of trauma, but especially in those areas where people are not just looking for resources and help, but they're bringing a lot of baggage with them, right? So there's a lot of brokenness, and they're trying to figure out, well, how do I get started from here? And re-entry work in general, it is important to me, right? And on the policing level of connecting not just the enforcement side of things, but how do we connect people with resources that are going to be long lasting, right? So, but yeah, that type of training, the SWIFT program that we have here at Parkland, those types of things, but like even the advisors could benefit from that type of training when they have people come in, whether it's just for class for orientation or they stay after with questions. So yeah, all these different groups would benefit from it. I mean, I don't think there's any entity of community that it's not going to help. So
I love that. Yeah,
I love that it's free. I mean, you can't beat that, and we've talked about going to places. So if people are requesting training, whether or not we'd be able to go to their facility, and I think that's available. We've talked about having it housed, whether we do it by like every 2 months, we might set a date to say, hey, we're offering this training at Parkland in the auditorium, but we're so flexible and willing to make things work. I mean, and that's what's nice about this. So I hope that we just have an outpouring of people that say, hey, sign us up for this, fit us in whenever you can, because we've got tons of people. We'll go in, teams of 3 or 4, or whatever we got to do to make it work. And if people have a specific request, let's just say, hey, we want somebody from Urbana PD to come. We'll send Lieutenant Coker for you, and Lamont Pepper's going to be there too, or whatever it is. Tell them to bring some barbecue too, because
now there you go volunteering. You weren't supposed to bring up the cooking. This is how you get uninvited to the party. That was in-house.
But I mean, that's what's nice about this is that, yeah, we can formulate and just tailor it to your needs if you have a request. So even working with larger groups, we have bigger space so that we can, take into account the social distancing. I think we've talked about doing virtual options as well for people.
Absolutely.
That's
Yeah,
easier for
absolutely.
them to attend. So, yeah.
Really quick, and while we have our officers here, I wanted to go back to a question because I wasn't sure if we shared any perspective abroad. Either Sam or Barbara, are either of you familiar with the Ubuntu philosophy? Are either of you familiar with Ubuntu or what that means for police reimagining? I know we had that question earlier. So it comes from a concept, and I'm familiar with it because I've done readings, but just kind of for our general audience, I like to be transparent. I went to Google just trying to share something on the surface, and I'm not presenting this as an expert, but I just wanted to hit the question that we had, how we thought this fit in with the Ubuntu philosophy on reimagining policing. And so one of the things about the Ubuntu philosophy, it's an African philosophy, and what it deals with, it places an emphasis on being self through others. So it talks about, and oftentimes you'll hear the phrasing in the philosophy, I am because of who we all are. So it takes a very deeper look at what humanity should be. How, I am who I am because of who Karen is and because how she impacts me. I am blessed based off of how Karen blesses me and vice versa. And so I think that when we look at policing, and if we're looking at the Ubuntu philosophy, one of the things I want to talk about too, or just share, is that there is an inherent trauma and an historical trauma when a police officer shows up and doesn't look like the alleged offender. And I think we want to acknowledge that, whether that's Black on white, whether that's male on female, whether that's, Latina X versus, African American. I think that there is such an inherent historical hurt in this country that we like to gloss over sometimes. Sometimes there's a frustration that happens. You're having a conversation and someone says, oh God, we got to talk about slavery. We got to bring that up. We got to go all the way back there. And I appreciate Sam for bringing that up. But unattended hurt is well-traveled hurt. And I think that while America is the greatest country, I'm not necessarily trying to live anywhere else. I think that we have to try to stay in the moment of being mindful that we have over 450 years of unattended hurt, which is why it's well-traveled. It is 2021, and we have seen young people take to the streets like many of our grandparents and great-parents took to the streets, fighting for equal rights on all fronts, whether it was racial, gender, LGBTQ, and those are unattended to well-traveled hurts. What I like about this training, and certainly nothing is perfect, it creates space to have discussions about these well-traveled hurts. I think it creates spaces for officers and community people alike to share stories and to learn from them. And so, looking at the Ubuntu project on reimagining police, and I'm not an expert on it, but when you talk about community and we're talking about humanity, sorry, that's my email. They won't leave me alone. What does policing look like when we just start seeing ourselves and other people? What does interactions look like? If I'm a police officer and I roll up on a young lady who is certainly maybe she's having issues, and I'm having trouble trying to figure out, is she inebriated? Is she drug induced? Is she trauma triggered? But what happens if I roll upon her and I see her in a same humanistic light as I do my daughter? How does that impact my treatment? When I have conversations with people like Karen, what happens to the relationship between Karen and I if I keep the same level of respect in my timbre, my tone, my body language, and my positioning as I would my mom, as I would my sister, as I would my brother? Let's not create the gender. And so I think that this training hints on the humanistic and the humanity side of things, and I appreciate that. And I was just hoping maybe, Karen, you could share, because you've done so much work in this, or maybe just give us a little bit the importance of humanism in responding to trauma.
So it is, so I know we're short of time, so I probably will defer, because I think it was super important, because you sort of put the conversation out. You said, hey, I want you to understand the Ubuntu theory of policing, right? And it's much more of a communal relational model that says, you know, I am because we are. And so I would love, like, in closing, maybe to because I think that that's a good part, right? Like, I think we all hinted that that was a part of our shared values. But if you thought about like that as a part of this work moving forward, again, answering Lamon's question, how do you think having a more relational model of policing might change things? Any closing thoughts about that? Yeah.
It kind of ties into a few of the different things we've talked about. Thank you, Lamont, for explaining the explanation for that, the imaginative.
Shell only, that's all it was.
Okay. So because I didn't know what it was. But when you said that, I am because of who we are, the first thought was, I get to walk in your shoes. And I always tell people, and Barb hinted on this, we live in this community that we serve. You know, we are neighbors with each other. It's one of the things you always hear people talk about when there is no residency requirement, and then the officers will all move out because they don't want to live in an S-hole. I don't want to live with these people. I moved out to Muhammad, or, you know, it's just like, I work in Champaign, but I don't want to live there. Well, why not? This is our community, right? So when you look at that approach and we realize that we're all human first, we all come from the same place. You know, my brokenness might be a little different than yours, but this is what this is. And that's why we keep emphasizing, we all have trauma. It all affects us in different ways. And that's how we keep it real with people, right? And it kind of diminishes or lessens that us versus them, because there doesn't have to be sides. And it's hard to break that down, but once we realize that we're all part of this community in which we're serving, I mean, it helps us to not see it as like, you know, oh, well, I'm going out there and I'm the enemy, right? And you're the person that's going to attack me, just to break down those walls. So that's what I think this training highlights for us, to understand that. And, you know, we talk about humanizing the badge, and that's part of it too, because, you know, and when I do teach at the Police Training Institute, Lamont, you talked about this, I always tell the recruits, when you go and, you know, whether it's a stolen bike report or a sexual assault victim, I want you to treat that victim as if they are your family member. Yes, you're going through the who, what, where, when, and why. But if that's my mom that just got raped, if that's my sister, if that's my best friend, what type of service do I want them to get? You know, I want to do the best job I can. I want to be thorough. I mean, and that could be my neighbor. I might not realize it, but that could be like my favorite teacher's son that just got, you know, raped. So, I mean, those are the types of things that it's like, we have to put ourselves in those shoes to imagine how do we want to be treated, you know, and there is nothing that separates us. I mean, people might create that for us and say, oh, well, you know, I live in Lincolnshire and you don't, well, I had to come, you know, deal with this, but we are all part of this community. So I think that's what this training highlights. And I think if we can remember that and we take that approach with us as we, go out to calls, I think that's one of the biggest improvements we'll have in terms of how we police better. So,
Wow.
Barb, anything to add?
Yeah, I think Sam, really summed it up, but, the other thing that we, need to stay on is the community needs to continue to be involved in what goes on at police departments and what the hiring process is. And we need to have, I'm proud of the place I work at here at the U of I. We have a huge diverse police department. The last 7 people we've hired have been diversity. So women and minorities, and they're loving it here. They're all very young, but it's very different than what we have done in the past. So, it does take the community to be involved in what happens at police departments, because we do listen, and that's how change happens, is when we come together and we talk about it, and we see what we're doing and how we can change. I think we can, with the community's help, I think, change will come. I know that's certainly what we're doing here. The community said we need mental health. We've got 4 Comfort Canines at our department that we are putting out all over the community. We now have the co-model response, where we now have a counselor in a squad car with a police officer. So this is what we've been asked to do. This is what the community's asking. And we're like, you know what, we can make this happen. So I think we are making baby steps, but it's like an investment. I'm in it for the long haul. And I think change can come. We just have to have the right people pushing forward and be willing to listen and be transparent.
Love
That's
it.
what I have to say.
Thank you so much. And Lamont, you get closing words, because we're out of time. Do you have final thoughts? Oh, you're still on mute.
I'm deferring to you. We want to hear from you. Come on, bring it on home.
No. So this has been a great hour, and I love that. The only other thing that I would add about Ubuntu, as particularly the local initiative and folks I know that are involved in that work, part of what I see as this training is the more we can give tools and resources into the community so that the community can be involved in its own healing, recovering, leadership, and sometimes policing, right? So when connected, safe, resilient community, it's why we're the Trauma and Resiliency Initiatives, actually need less law enforcement. They are actually safer, where I can reach out to my neighbor, where some things that I might call law enforcement about, we can resolve with each other, and we can leave maybe policing just for the things that actually need policing. So in more resilient, communities, right, the more we can equip the community to take care of its own, and the more we feel connected, the better we are. So, and I know law enforcement would love to be used strategically, where neighbors look after neighbors, and right, where when we can respond to each other's mental health care and wellness, and we can do more prevention and early intervention, and there could be fewer crises. So that's the community that I want to live. This is one effort. So we hope you reach out. Hopefully you're also excited. We are looking forward to seeing lots of requests for this training, because we want to serve and support you. Thank you so much for your time. We really, really appreciate it. It was wonderful. Thank you. And until our next show. Bye-bye.